Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard. That's Heath Cummings. We have the sits now for you in week number 4, the players that you should probably be avoiding and the guys that you want to sit for their particular matchups. Dave, let's start with the guys that you're looking to avoid for this week. And it's an interesting list of guys here. A couple running backs in Miles Sanders, Devin Singletary. Singletary coming off his best game of the season. Kareem Hunt, Rashad Bateman, and Gerald Everett. So when we look at these players here and the guys that have been struggling a little bit, talking about Miles Sanders because he's getting the work, he's just not getting the production.
No, and that's what happened last week. He averaged 3.07 yards per carry, and that was in a favorable matchup against the Commanders, and now he's getting the Jaguars. And I think Jacksonville's front seven is very legit. They've yet to allow a touchdown to a running back. They've given up 3.6 yards per carry. That's 5th best in football. Top 10 in yards before and after contact allowed. It's a huge challenge for Jacksonville's defense. But I'm just worried about Miles Sanders being a touchdown or bust running back. I don't mind flexing him in non-PPR, but I think you've got to look at him as a guy who might get you 80 total yards, and that's it.
Touchdown or bust guy. He scored 1 touchdown in the last 2 seasons. That was in week 1. And you mentioned this Jacksonville defense. They have shut down some pretty impressive running backs. Antonio Gibson did a lot of work in the passing game week 1. Jonathan Taylor was basically held to one of his worst games of his career in week 2. And then last week they shut down Austin Eckler. Sony Michel had better rushing yards. Now both Eckler and Gibson were great in the passing game, but we know that's not necessarily Miles Sanders' best asset. Of the 3 running backs, though, which one do you have the most confidence in? Sanders, Singletary, Hunt?
It's probably Hunt, especially in PPR.
All right, we'll see if he gets in the end zone. He hasn't scored since week 1.
That's the game. At least he's just like Sanders. He's getting 15 touches per week too, but he's getting a little bit more in the passing game, and he's always got the chance to score. He had 3 goal line opportunities last week. Couldn't cash them in. Chubb came in, did it on 4th and goal.
Lamar Jackson might be the MVP of the NFL right now, but one of his top receivers is not necessarily someone you're buying as a starting option. You're saying to sit Rashad Bateman.
Yeah, I mean, he's playing Buffalo this week, and I know that Buffalo's secondary is all beat up, and I'm sure he's going to get some deep opportunities because he's gotten them every single week in this offense, but we saw that downside last week. I don't mind using him as a number 3 type of fantasy receiver, especially in non-PPR, because I don't know if those catches are going to be there. But I'm concerned that the scheme that Buffalo plays will be prepared for the deep balls that Rashad Bateman gets. His target share is under 20%, and this is a Ravens offense that's throwing the ball at a 56% clip.
You don't mind Rashad Bateman this week, do you?
No, I still think Lamar is going to keep the Ravens in this game, and I don't think they're going to have a lot of success running the ball against Buffalo, and so I would expect that Bateman's going to get some of those deep shots, and if he hits one, then he's probably giving you a top 15 or a top 20 week. So I think the upside is worth the risk of the 4.
Who has more red zone targets, Rashad Bateman or Jamie Eisenberg?
It's not
it's
Rashad
a tie.
Bateman. Yeah. But that's not his game, though.
They score from the 50. They don't need red zone targets.
Yeah. He's leading the NFL in yards per catch, and so it's going to be a big play. Even when he's not scoring 2 for 59, has kind of been where his number lies. So it would just be nice to see him get a little bit more targets, and could be the case if the Ravens are chasing points. All right, Heath, let's move on to your sits for this week. Couple quarterbacks that you're avoiding, Tom Brady and Russell Wilson. You're also saying to sit Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, and Allen Robinson. We've had the Russell Wilson conversation already. You don't like him, Dave does. Tom Brady, though, getting healthy in the receiving core, hopefully gets Chris Godwin back on top of Julio Jones and Russell Gage joining Mike Evans. You don't see a path, though, for success for Brady this week.
If Chris Godwin's back at 100% this week, then I will take this all back and I'll start him. But this Bucs offense has not been the same thing that it's been since Tom Brady got there. Their pass rate has absolutely plummeted. He's throwing 5 fewer passes per game than he did last year. They can't run the ball. They rank 26th in the NFL in yards per carry. They can't protect Brady. His pressure rate is the highest since 2017. You look at the over-under for this game, you think Brady versus Mahomes should be one of the highest over-unders on the whole slate. It's 45. It's in the lower half. This is going to be a defensive football game, I'm afraid.
See, I think that they kind of give up on the run game a little bit in this one, and they might have to because the Chiefs are going to be the one to put up points. But he's got Mike Evans back. That's a plus. Russell Gage played really well last week. I think Brady learned to trust him. That's a plus. And I think the tight ends get a little bit more involved. And if Godwin's back, then it's all systems go. And you talked about how Brady's been pressured a lot. The Bucs have had the fewest pass rush pressures allowed this season. It's because he's getting the ball out quick when he is throwing the football. He's just not doing it as much as we'd like. I think that changes this week.
I would like to see Donovan Smith back. There's still a question about that for the left tackle, but he was trending in the right direction last week, so hopefully he will be back out there for this week. The thing that I like about this is that the Chiefs have allowed 2 touchdown passes to every quarterback that they faced so far this year. That's one thing that Brady hasn't done. He hasn't thrown multiple touchdowns. Who knows how long he's gone 3 games in a row without doing that. I don't think it will be a 4th. I don't think he's going to have a monster game. We talked about this on our podcast. Not a great week for quarterbacks. Right. So I do think Brady in maybe a chasing point situation. It's funny how this is kind of a role reversal from the Super Bowl. Remember, the Chiefs had the offensive line concerns, and obviously the Bucs pressured Mahomes in one of his worst games. Maybe we see the same thing happen against Brady, but I do think we could get a little bit of a back and forth. I would probably take the over over on what the Vegas total is. Cam Akers coming off of his best game last week. You don't like him, though, in this week's game against a very good 49ers defense.
I don't really like the Rams offense very much against the 49ers defense that has just shut down basically everyone they've faced, no matter what position they play. I still think it will be a little bit of a timeshare with Darrell Henderson. I have no idea if Cam Akers is going to get any work at all in the passing game. So I'd like to have Cam Akers on my team. I wouldn't mind buying low, but I don't want to start him yet.
Totally get that, and probably the same thing with J.K. Dobbins, right? You're going to buy low on him. He's dealing with a chest injury, is expected to play, but you didn't see enough, obviously, last week to say trust him in this matchup.
And the bigger problem maybe is we saw too much from Justice Hill. He looked phenomenal. John Harbaugh bragging about him today, so I think that will remain a committee. The committee will be fine most weeks because the Ravens' offense is so good, not against the Bills.
Yeah, it's just a tough matchup, so hopefully he gets through this game, has another quality performance. I like that they gave him 2 catches last week, but probably not something that you want to start unless you're in a desperate situation, and in that case, it would probably be a flex at best in non- and half PPR leagues. All right, we'll move on to my sits. You mentioned you don't like the Rams. I'm a little bit concerned about Matthew Stafford. He has 1 good game so far this season, so I'm going to avoid him. I'm going to avoid Derek Carr as well. In his last 6 games against the Broncos, he's averaging under 18 fantasy points per game. I don't think it will be over 20 fantasy points per game against a very good Denver defense. Clyde Edwards-Hilaire is a little risky to sit, but it's a tough matchup against Tampa Bay, and then you have the 2 receivers here in Ayuk and Thielen. Thielen coming off a very good game last week. So let's talk about Clyde Edwards-Hilaire because it hasn't exactly been a dominant start for him. He's been a little touchdown dependent, had the really good game against the Chargers on Thursday night, but a lot of that had to do with the long run that he broke where he was carrying the ball like a baby, afraid to fumble it. I'm nervous about him in this matchup against Tampa Bay. The one thing that's been consistent for the Bucs throughout their entire tenure the last couple of years has been their run defense. And we thought, okay, no Ndamukong Suh and then Akeem Hicks going out. Well, they were still really good against the Packers running backs last week. I'm going to guess I'm probably the low guy on Clyde Edwards-Hilaire. You guys still feel comfortable starting him this week?
He's a borderline start. He makes me very nervous both on my bench and in my starting lineup. He actually had 0 rushing yards last year. It's amazing the way he's scored touchdowns and produced fantasy points based on the little number of touches. Almost the exact opposite of what he's done throughout his entire career.
And I'm nervous too. I've got him right too high, and I've got him at 20. So I'm looking at names behind him in my rankings right now. Ezekiel Elliott. You know how I feel about Rashad Penny. I think he's going to have a good game. Those are 2 guys. Damian Pierce, a 3rd one against the Chargers. 3 guys I'll easily start ahead of CEH. He's going to move down for me too.
Yep, I hope he still continues to produce, but this just feels like a game where it could be a little bit tough to trust. I might have him too high. He threw the low guy at 29. Adam Thielen coming off a strong game last week. Had 7 targets 2 weeks ago, 8 targets last week. It feels as if, though, a Justin Jefferson game is coming because he's due, and that's kind of my thought on Adam Thielen. I think somebody got to run away from, but I do think that this is a good Saints defense on the other side. I think this is going to be a game where he doesn't score, and as we've seen, if he's not finding the end zone, he doesn't exactly produce at a high level. Dave, you're a little bit more confident. Heath and I are a little bit more concerned about Adam Thielen. So still a number 3 receiver, but not necessarily a must-start guy into a receiver league.